chemicals, which can be within foods and drinks that we take in from outside. And we've also got a range of naturally occurring chemicals that we produce inside as intermediates in our metabolism. So in other words, these are halfway stages of compounds which we normally then have to go through detoxification pathways. And if we haven't got those detoxifications working, then we get a build-up and we can get symptoms from that. So compounds here I've put down, and most of these are all in what we call the toxicity box, and you'll recognize some of them. So acetaldehyde, this is a result of fungal overgrowth on the breakdown of ethanol. Acetic acid is what it then goes on to produce. Acetone is something which is involved with the sugar metabolism pathway with diabetics. Ammonia is something which is produced in various biochemical pathways in the body, but is also produced by bacteria and certain parasites in the gut. Butyric acid is produced by bacteria down in the colon. Cyanide is produced in the mitochondria in hypoxic conditions. Ethane is a gas which is given off when we've got poor or excess breakdown of unsaturated fatty acids. So this is particularly with the omega-3 long-chain fatty acids like EPA, DHA. So this is actually measured in the breath. So they have the ethane breath test, is a standard test for so-called dyslexia, for children with dyslexia who would respond to taking omega-3 or possibly GLA, evening primrose supplements. So it's not just omega-3, so it's omega-6 as well. So it's become a standard, the ethane breath test. If they're positive, they're high in ethane, it means they're breaking down a lot of their long-chain unsaturated fatty acids. So these are children who need, or adults who need to take more omega-3, omega-6. Formaldehyde is the breakdown of methanol, wood alcohol, which we produce in the system, in the gut, from bad funguses. So good funguses like yeasts, brewer's yeast and things, makes ethanol, which then goes on to make aldehydes and acetic acid. Bad funguses, and those pathogenic ones like we saw before, Fusarium, Aspergillus, etc., will produce methanol. And methanol is highly toxic, and methanol will then degrade to formaldehyde and then to formic acid. So formaldehyde, formic acid are made from methanol. Formic acid, remember, is the breakdown, but it's the thing that gives the itch. So uncontrollable itching, scratching, anal itching if it's down in there, or itching anywhere, think formic acid first of all. Therefore think formaldehyde and think methanol. Glutamate, so we do make glutamate or glutamic acid in the body from glutamine. So we put this down as a reactive intermediate. If we have high levels of glutamate and we don't need it. Hydrogen sulfide, that's that gas that gives the odoriferous smell to wind if you pass it, and the feces in there. This is something that's done by the breakdown of sulfur-bearing amino acids by bad bacteria. So bacteria attacking, if we don't properly digest our food, attacking methionine and cysteine, etc. Hydrogen peroxide, this is a highly oxidizing chemical as a reduction of superoxide there. So there's various pathways in the body that produce hydrogen peroxide. 4-hydroxynonenal is an aldehyde from the breakdown of usually rancid fats. Indole is a chemical that again is produced in the gut. It's a standard biological test for dysbiosis. Indoles. So indoles have been shown to cause again many possibly psychiatric illnesses. Abraham Hoffa was the first to discover this back in the 1950s with adrenochrome and adrenolutin, which were indoles from the breakdown of adrenaline and noradrenaline. The three types of lactic acid, L-lactic, D-lactic and DL-lactic acid. These are different isoforms of lactic acid, isomers. Possibly some people say the D is the worst when they have tests done, if they show up to D, whereas the L-lactic acid is better. I test all three separately. But basically what it means is you've got a problem at pyruvate to going into the Krebs cycle to acetyl-CoA, and if you're not crossing pyruvate down into acetyl, it shunts it sideways into lactic acid. That's the end of our anaerobic glycolysis pathway. This is why when you use up your blood glucose anaerobically, as you belt off down the road, 10 seconds later you can't go any further because you're getting you're not working aerobically through the Krebs cycle, so it shunts it into making lactic acid. And as the lactic acid builds up, some people say that the D-lactic acid is the main one in cancer cases because the D-lactic acid produces more acidity, so a lot of cancer cases are very acid in there, and that they try to avoid glycolysis as much as you can because cancer cells were found 80 years ago by Otto Warburg to be anaerobic, so they don't use that energy through the Krebs cycle and things. So the theory is if you go bypass with the ketogenic diet, you bypass using glycolysis, you don't build up those lactic acids, so you go straight into the Krebs cycle by burning fat and amino acids. So for a long time they've known, maybe 100 years, that cancer cases don't respond well to, or that it's bad for them to eat sugar. So anything with sugar stimulates the glycolysis pathway, and that feeds a cancer. So it feeds the energy that cancers use. So the current thinking is ketogenic diet is higher protein, higher fats, and low carbs to try and starve the cancer. Malondialdehyde, again, like 4-hydroxynonal, is an aldehyde produced from rancid fats. Methane is a gas produced, one of the gases of flatulence in the gut, produced by the breakdown of starches and cellulose. This is what's produced and given off by the cows as a gas, creates global warming. Methanol, as they say, is wood alcohol produced by pathogenic funguses. Oxalates, again, we produce oxalates in the body, but we're going to talk about oxalates as a naturally occurring compound, but we do produce oxalates as a breakdown of collagen. Phenols, as I said, are substances that the body does make from the breakdown of phenylalanine if we don't metabolize it properly, but it's also produced by parasites. Propionic acid is a carbon-3, which again is made in the colon by bad bacteria, particularly gram-negative bacteria, can get incorporated into myelin and other body functions. Pyruvate itself, because we're not going into Krebs cycle. Toluene, this would be produced in the gut by parasites, particularly nematodes. Tyramine, which is one of these intermediates from tyrosine en route to making dopamine, very, very toxic substance in the brain. So there's all sorts of families of these intermediates. Uric acid, of course, is made in the body, can be very inflammatory. So the ones with the asterisk here are the most common ones that we find to test, first of all. If a person's got a toxin, a chemical toxin, and it's an endogenous toxin, but it's something that's made inside the body rather than a pollutant from outside or xenobiotic. So the main source of chemicals otherwise is within naturally occurring chemicals within the food. And this is something which really not many people talk about. It's something I think that very few practitioners in natural health really look at, is that most people eat the toxins and they're naturally occurring substances. So the old saying of one man's meat is another man's poison has been true for thousands of years. I think it's probably Hippocrates who said this first of all. So there is a range of naturally occurring chemicals within foods which some people have real struggles with and really should avoid them, certainly for the short term being. So let's have a look at these. So in here we've gone in alphabetical order, but some of them are more common than others. So alpha-solanine, these are part of, we'll see in a minute when we look at them in more detail, the deadly nightshade family. Okay? So these have been known for a long time to be issues with a range of people. Betaine, that's that derivative from choline, that if we don't have enough zinc, builds up and can cause problems. Caffeine. The amino acid cysteine can be quite a problem with some people. Very few, but there's some where they can't metabolize cysteine onwards into taurine and things. Glutamate, and that makes people very high if they don't metabolize glutamate or recycle it back to glutamine. Histamine. Histamine, as we'll see, is a very inflammatory, pro-inflammatory chemical present in a lot of foods. Isothiocyanates is one of the big four here. This is, iso means the same, thio means sulfur, and cyanide means cyanide. Okay, so this is a source, lovely source of cyanide for you, which is great for cancer patients who take cyanide, and it's supposed to kill off the cancer cells. But for the rest of us, if you can't metabolize cyanide, you can be in trouble with it. And this, of course, as we'll see, is our cruciferous vegetables. Malondialdehyde, which I mentioned, is from rancid fats. Oxalates, as we'll see, really basically gum up your tubes. Your urinary plumbing system is very subject to oxalates. Salicylates, these are the aspirin-like compounds, which we see can bring on a lot of asthma, allergic type of reactions with people. Sulfites, we've talked about already with sulfite oxidase, build up of sulfites. Theobromine, this is the substance in chocolate that makes dogs as sick as dogs, as they say. You know, how do you feel? I feel as sick as a dog. If you've ever seen a dog sick with theobromine from eating chocolate, it's not a pretty sight. So, theobromine. In this one we got tomatotoxin, which we now know is atropine. So we'll change that to atropine, which inhibits the production of acetylcholine. Tyramine, which we said is the intermediate substance from tyrosine, and uric acid. So let's have a look at these in a little bit more detail, because these are things which we're going to come across a lot. So most common toxins are naturally occurring chemicals within the foods we eat or drink, natural endogenously produced reactive intermediates which fail to be metabolized completely. So isothiocyanates. We have 4 big ones. Okay? So I keep these to last. I usually go through them just in case some people have 2 or 3 different naturally occurring toxins. But the big 4, which we go in last, and isothiocyanates is a biggie, because it's probably about 20% of the people we test who've got naturally occurring toxins are sensitive to isothiocyanates. So this is your Brussels sprouts, broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, kale, spinach, pak choi. So these are the classic leafy green vegetables, and you'll see that they come back in a lot of these naturally occurring chemicals in other departments. So oxalates, for instance, are rich in many of these as well. But this is the one that contains the cyanide in there. And then sort of second part down, watercress, mustard and cress, or garden cress, mustard, turnips, kohlrabi, horseradish, ordinary radishes, capers, globe artichokes, and celery. So I'd say if we drew a little line along there, this would be sort of stage 2, but that's the prime ones. And then for some reason, possibly there's a few people who show positive and weaken to egg, oats, and bulgur wheat. So I don't know why it's eggs, because it seems to be in everything else, but you know, there are some people who, very few, but who weaken to eggs in relationship to isothiocyanates. But the big ones are going to be your sprouts, your broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, kale, spinach, and pak choi. And those are the things that people say, well, I eat all of those every day. I eat those every day. And you say, well, that's why you got the problem. Oh, I had a retired professor of biochemistry, lovely lady, the other week, and she showed to this. She was very tired and so on. And she showed to toxins and so on. And I said, oh, yeah, you're showing to cyanide. And she said, well, where do you think that comes from? Because she knew that cyanide was produced naturally in the mitochondria in complex 3 to 4, and just basically inhibits you producing ATP. And I said, it's from Brussels sprouts. I said, and what I do is I go through and say, do you eat Brussels sprouts? No. So there's no point in testing. If they don't eat them, it doesn't really matter. Do you eat Brussels sprouts? Yes, so test it. Okay, use your food lectin kit and test them. Broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, spinach, kale, pak choi. She had them all, and she had at least one or more of those every day. So I said, that's the source of your cyanide. But she said, that's all I eat, as far as vegetables are concerned. And we're all told how excellent they are, and they are. They're fantastic for people who are tolerant. But when you have too much, these are chemicals. These are not allergies. Remember, they're chemical toxic buildup of a naturally occurring toxin. So all you've got to do is stop eating them for a period of time, get the level down, and then you can tolerate a bit of it on a rotational sort of basis. But they can be deadly, and they will poison your mitochondria. So you actually end up feeling more tired the more broccoli you eat for these people. So yes, it's great for people, one man's meat, but another man is a poison. And a lot of these people are red people, body type, but because they're governed by their thyroid, and they're goitrogen, they're blockers of thyroid function. They're goitrogens, so they stimulate the production of a goiter. So particularly red body types are deadly for these foods. They've got to really keep them to a minimum because they absorb it. Possibly the sulfur is taken up the thiocyanate bit by the thyroid. So a lot of this detoxification of thiocyanates, isothiocyanates, is through sulfation pathway. Let's just get rid of that. So the mechanism of action of isothiocyanates seems to be proposed to involve inhibition of the cytochrome B in complex 3. This is why they end up with this cyanide buildup in complex 3, so they can't go on to complex 4 to make ATP. Common diseases, therefore, known as Parkinson's disease. So Parkinson's have a problem at this point in complex 3 in the mitochondria. Any map, I think it might be on there, the map of where Parkinson patients have this problem in the production of ATP in the mitochondria. So if you've got a Parkinson's patient, you must check them for isothiocyanates. And if they're eating isothiocyanates, take them off the foods, okay, because they're killing themselves. This is why all Parkinsons respond and show muscle tests that they need CoQ10, because their electrons are just going ballistic in their neurons, in their mitochondria. And of course, once you've destroyed the mitochondria, because you've got this build-up of electrons, you can't get them back necessarily. And that's what's happening, this neural degeneration in the Parkinson's patients. Get them off the broccoli, get them off the sprouts and the cabbage and the kale and so on, ASAP. We find it's one of the biggest stimulants to leukotriene B4, the inflammatory chemicals. So most of these people are in pain as well. So get them off the isothiocyanates. Detoxification mostly is by methylation. So S-adenosylmethionine, 5-methyl-tetrahydrofolate-methylcobalamin. But the important thing is to come off the foods, and usually the level drops down within days, possibly a little bit longer. If next time you see them in a month's time, they're still weakening to isothiocyanates, then they stay off a bit longer. But most people are not, and they're beginning to come alive again and say, yes, I actually feel a lot better. I'm in less pain, and I got more energy again. So mitochondrial DNA is the DNA located within mitochondria. It's circular in shape as opposed to linear like nuclear DNA. And I'll just show you a picture. Yeah. So this is the mitochondrial DNA. And if we look round here, what the DNA encodes for is a series of genes. And each of those genes is involved with the production of energy inside the mitochondria. So every enzyme in the Krebs cycle and in the electron transport part is in the mitochondrial DNA. That's what it encodes for. So we've got cytochrome B, as we talked there, which is part of complex 3. And here we've got NADH dehydrogenase, which is part of complex 3. So if I flick on to the next one, you'll see it's here and here where Parkinson's is located. So they have this defect in the production of energy in the mitochondria. And that's what basically is Parkinson's. We've got dystonia here, and we've got a series of other motor neurone disease here. So these are mitochondrial defects. So we will need to go back in the other chart, and you can then locate down here motor neurone disease would be in complex 4. So you look for the reasons why these have become inhibited. And what you find then with Parkinson's disease is they all seem to respond to being given CoQ10 to help them produce the energy. And CoQ10 also acts as an antioxidant. But you've got to get them off the things that inhibit complex 3, that cytochrome B enzyme, which is cyanide. So you've got to get them off the broccoli and the green vegetables there. These are all the things that we're told are so good to us. Now, number 2 of the big boys, undoubtedly, is alpha-solanine. So, of number 2 of the 4 big boys, I call. Alpha-solanine is perhaps 15% of our patients. They may come in with joint pains, tiredness, fatigue, muscle aches and pains, a whole variety of things. And the main source is potatoes, and this is when they're going green. So the green is not the alpha-solanine. Green is chlorophyll because the potatoes have been exposed to the air, or the light rather. And if you dig up potatoes, if you grow your own potatoes, and if you clean them up and put them in a dark bag, they'll last for the whole winter. If you leave them out on the lawn to dry in the sun, they'll go green. Okay? If you get potatoes that are left in the shop with the light of the shop on them all day, they go green. The frustrating thing is you can't always see the green when you buy the potato until you peel it. And you peel it and you think, that's not white or yellow, it's got a slight greeny tinge, and you think, that's got solanine in it. And if you're solanine sensitive, you've got to be very, very careful. The worst solanine is in new potatoes, unfortunately. New potatoes have a much higher level than old potatoes. So medium old potatoes are stored in the dark are usually okay. But old potatoes, the big old baking potatoes that you get still from last year, are one of the highest as well in solanines. Because when you peel those, if you don't bake them and you peel them, there's so much that you've got that greeny tinge. Obviously, some are brighter green. You just throw those away. You mustn't eat those at all because it's highly toxic. Tomatoes. So it's in tomatoes and potatoes are the same family. They're all part of the solanation family or deadly nightshade family. And again, we find that those are generally much higher in solanines when they're grown in greenhouses. They're artificially grown. When they're grown naturally outside, they don't seem to have the solanine content anywhere near as much. Which is interesting, isn't it? So it's a natural light. Glass in the greenhouse takes out ultraviolet, so the plant doesn't get the ultraviolet light, which is what it's looking for, and it builds up the solanine. We found that if you go and eat tomatoes in August, September time, they're not grown in greenhouses by that time. But if you get early tomatoes, April, May, June, they're all grown under glass and they have this high level of solanine. Green peppers. Sometimes people are sensitive to red peppers and yellow peppers, but it's particularly green peppers, aubergines or eggplants. So those would be the common foods. Tobacco, if you chew it, paprika, goji berries and ashwagandha. These are, tobacco, peppers and things are all part of this deadly nightshade. Goji berries I don't know anything about, whether they're truly a solanation family or ashwagandha, but they put them in as sources of solanine. Now there are some other foods which may contain solanine but are not part of the nightshade family. This is blueberries and bilberries. So this is why sometimes you find an isolated person reacts to something they're eating at breakfast time. It could be a fruit, and you actually find it's blueberries. But of course, non-organic blueberries are sprayed a lot, and many people are sensitive just to the sprays. But blueberries, possibly bilberries, but not many people ever eat bilberries, not in this country because they don't really grow very well. Apples, cherries, sugar beets, okra, artichokes, which I think is globe artichokes. These are foods which you may consider. They're not solanine foods, they're not deadly nightshade foods, but they do contain some solanine. And ascorbyl palmitate, which is the so-called fat-soluble vitamin C, which is used as a lubricant in a lot of cheaper type of nutritional products. If you see it's got ascorbyl palmitate in, it's palmitic acid, which is carbon-16. It's fat, basically. And generally, palmitic and ascorbyl are excuses for putting in stearates, because it can allow up to 40% stearate, 60% palmitic acid. So it's used as a lubricant in the pharmaceutical industry. You know, they put about 1%, 2% of this in to lubricate when the capsule goes on with the powder so it doesn't jam up. And all you're doing is eating candle wax, basically. So if you empty the content, if it contains ascorbyl palmitate, open up the capsule, put it into a glass of water, and you'll see the contents all float. And if you want to drink that, that's fine, but you won't get much absorption from it. Even though they sell it as a fat-soluble source of vitamin C, that's not the reason they put it in there. So most ascorbyl palmitate is derived from potatoes, which is one of the reasons you need to watch it. And yeast. Most yeast contain potato from potato. So I didn't know. Okay, so solanine foods basically inhibit the production of acetylcholine. So they inhibit the acetylcholine esterase. They inhibit the breakdown. Sorry, getting it right. They inhibit the breakdown of acetylcholine. So you get a high level of acetylcholine because it inhibits acetylcholine transferase, which is a B2, B3, and manganese-dependent enzyme. So if you have a high level of acetylcholine, you've got a high muscle contraction, because your acetylcholine is what produces the muscle contractions, okay? So you won't get Alzheimer's disease, which is low acetylcholine, so that's the good news. These people will always respond to the liver meridian. The liver will be their main meridian, because the liver equates with high levels of acetylcholine. If you plonk the potato on them and they go weak, it'll cross-check to when you therapy localize the liver, okay? Because the liver is high acetylcholine. So solanines inhibit acetylcholine esterase. Intestinal bacteria aid in the detoxification of hydrolyzing the glycine. Liver meridian detoxification again by methylation. Some herbs helped in the detoxification process here and there. Interestingly, from the point of view of cooking, solanine remains in cooked potatoes and things, but the one that has the lowest level is chips, or in America they call them fries. So the extreme heat of deep fat frying actually destroys more of the solanine, which is why sometimes people who are solanine intolerant can tolerate chips, but can't tolerate boiled potatoes and other types of potatoes. So let's have a look. Tyramine. This is a common one. I don't count this as one of the big four, but it is a common one. As we know, it's a derivative of tyrosine, so it's broken down by the same pathway as dopamine. So it needs monoamine oxidase, which is a copper and B2 dependent enzyme here, and then goes on to be methylated and then conjugated here. So we see this monoamine oxidase pathway, which breaks down noradrenaline, adrenaline, serotonin, is inhibited by benzoic acid, which is the food preserver. Caffeine, anthocyanidins, eugenol, which is taken from cloves, in oil of cloves, and naringen, which is that bioflavonoid in grapefruits that inhibits certain enzymes from functioning. So if you have a lot of benzoic acid, soft drinks and things like that, and a lot of caffeine, you maintain the level of tyramine, and this is what they found is involved often with headaches, particularly migraines. And that tyramine is such a toxic substance, it occupies the monoamine oxidase pathway, and then they can't use that for breaking down serotonin and other transmitters, which comes on with the generally comes on with the migraine headaches. So tyramine is naturally present in certain aged foods. Come on. So the underlying ones are the main ones, aged cheeses. So basically it's oxidized tyrosine. So cheese, but particularly if it's aged. Newer cheeses are less of a problem, but the blue cheeses and the hard cheeses tend to be the problems. Blue, brie, cheddar, Swiss, Roquefort, mozzarella, etc. These are all fairly deadly for tyramine people with migraines. Overripe bananas and avocados, safest thing is not to touch either for a while if you've got high tyramine. But the main ones are when they're going brown, of course, the banana, when you peel it back and it's got a bit of bruise in there. And avocados, again, when they're going brown. Don't touch that brown bit because that's the oxidized tyrosine, which is tyramine. And then you've got chocolate down here. So chocolate, bananas, avocados and cheese are the main culprits. Then you've got anything that's fermented or aged may be involved. So a lot of soya fermented products can cause problems. Sometimes alcoholic drinks, fermented vegetables. But bananas, avocados, cheese and chocolate are the principal ones. So they're all detoxified by monoamine oxidase, need vitamin C. Then we got the family of purines. These go on to form uric acid, which can be obviously big in gout. So here we've got adenosine and guanosine. These are the two nucleotide bases when they're broken down. And they both break down to produce xanthine, which we talked about yesterday. That's the substance when mixed with chlorine produces naloxone in the case of diabetes type 1. And with xanthine oxidase enzyme here goes on to make uric acid, which then in more soluble form goes to sodium urates, which we generally pee out. And if we don't pee them out, we get acute attacks of gout. So there has been a gene on chromosome 4 identified, has been recently found to transport uric acid, and genetic variations of the transporter have been linked to increased risk of development of hyperuricemia, in other words, gout and Alzheimer's disease. So that's on chromosome 4, the P arm there. So it could be that gout somewhat is predestined if you have that gene abnormality there. So high purine foods are the richest foods, of course, in adenosine and guanine. So it would be red meats, particularly the game meats, meat extracts, or the offal, shellfish, anchovies, alcohol, especially beers and wine. So all the good things in life, really. So phenolic foods, these include salicylates. So these, when we talked about phenols being high in the body, can be breakdowns of salicylates, histamine, and glutamates. So phenols are present mainly in certain foods and are also found as food additives or preservers in processing and food packaging. Phenylalanine. So let's have a look at salicylates. Big issue, salicylates, really. Here we see obviously in anything with aspirin, cold and flu remedies, medicines used for pain, for headaches and so on. And then with foods containing their salicylates, tea, coffee, almonds, dried herbs and spices all seem to contain it. Whether it comes because of the drying process or not, I don't know. And then we see paprika, which again, sharp green apples like Granny Smith's, bananas, cherries, strawberries and so on. So you can go through the list. And again, broccoli's in there at the end. So salicylates are in a fair variety. And they can cause a lot of asthma, difficulty in breathing with people, a lot of sinusitis, and we've come across nasal polyps, a classic thing in there as well. So you might find you can sometimes get patients with nasal polyps and they've all got chronic mucus and sinus problems, and they have salicylate issues. So that gives you a list there. It doesn't mean they can't have any of these. You just got to go through the list and see which ones the people have and test them from a food vaccine kit or get them to bring their samples in. So it could cause epilepsy, eczema, as I say. Detoxifies usually by glutathione. So we'll just get that because we're familiar with this. Histamine, systemic-wise, is broken down by usually diamine oxidase, aldehyde oxidase, and methylation and monoamine oxidase, the usual pathways here. The common way for systemic histamine is diamine oxidase and aldehyde oxidase. So this one needs adenosylcobalamin, vitamin C, P5P and iron. And this one needs adenosylcobalamin for the oxygen and molybdenum mainly here. So this is the way the body gets rid of histamine. So high doses of vitamin C will help you to get rid of histamine. So at this time of the year with kids having school examinations, the pollens are coming out, the people are sneezing, the brain is swelling with the histamine, and the exam results are going down because the kids can't think about the answers to the problem. Fill them up with heavy, large doses of vitamin C to stimulate the diamine oxidase and maybe P5P. Now, to stabilize the mast cells, we've talked about this several times, in other words, the cells around the mast cells, the cell membranes, to stabilize those so they don't go overreactive, is vitamin E, zinc and magnesium, and the bioflavonoids. And the main one there is hesperidin, and usually given with bromelain is a good combination, but hesperidin is the main stabilizer of mast cells. So this is a bioflavonoid that comes from citrus fruits. Quercetin will work as well, but quercetin is only 10% water soluble, so it doesn't get into the body very easily, whereas hesperidin is 90% water soluble and gets in much better. So think there, hesperidin, vitamin E, zinc and magnesium. So histamine foods, prickly pears, lots of histamine foods. Always tempted when you go to the Mediterranean to those hanging cactuses over, think, oh, I'll just take one of those. And then you regret it, don't you, for the rest of the day because you've got these little bits in your fingers there. If you do it, even the handkerchief, it still goes through there, so it pays to buy them when someone's taken the prickly bits off. They're there for a reason, aren't they? And we noticed that a lot of people have them in their front garden as security. So although you may be tempted, nobody walks through a prickly pear hedge there. So bananas, obviously cabbages. Down here we've got certain foods, especially a lot of fish can have histamine. Mackerel, lobster, crab, haddock, bass and so on, oysters, salmon. So there's a lot of fish, trout, which can produce histamine reactions. And these can be very severe. You know, people eat the fish and boom, they're in real trouble. They have to go in and have adrenaline to get them out of it. So chronic infections, allergies, detoxified by diamine oxidase, as I said. Glutamate. There are natural sources of glutamate. One of the highest sources is celery. So some people have real bad reactions to celery. It's one of the things you have to actually put in if you run a restaurant or anything, if a food contains celery. So it is actually known to be a real bad allergen in some people. And then, of course, all the artificial glutamates, the monosodium glutamates, as well as the ones which are present naturally. So that gives you, but MSG is the most common sort of source of excess glutamate for most people. So we'll work through those. Basically anything that's processed has probably got MSG in. I believe in America they tell me they even add it to the chips, the French fries, to make them more attractive, so you become addicted to eat more of them. So instead of putting salt on there, they put MSG on as well, which really tantalizes your tongue, or your brain thinks, oh, I need more of this. It's really good. So oxalates, and these are interesting because they can be formed from the breakdown of collagen here, to hydroxyproline, across to glycolate, hydroxylate, and then to this way, which basically needs P5P, pyridoxal 5-phosphate, to change them into glycine. So a deficiency of P5P can lead to a buildup of oxalates in the body. Now this pathway here of the oxalates can be oxalates from oxalate foods, as we'll see, One of the biggest sources, otherwise, is Aspergillus as a fungus. And this pathway here of breaking down ascorbates, vitamin C. So this is one of the problems associated with taking high levels of vitamin C, that there is a danger you may increase your oxalates and end up with kidney stones. Now, what Linus Pauling said is that ascorbic acid, an acid has a hydrogen, okay? And if you replace that hydrogen with potassium or magnesium, which are the common ones, you then get a neutral pH. So the best thing always is to muscle test a person if you want to use vitamin C, is that some people will need vitamin C, but they don't respond to ascorbic acid. They respond to magnesium or potassium ascorbate much better, because it doesn't shift the pH into making it too acid. So he was very adamant here that it's really ascorbic acid which does this more than ascorbate. And these can be derived from the diet or from also yeasts. So I think Aspergillus, was mold, when we've got mold around a lot, stimulates fungus which goes on to make oxalates from that. You're not likely to drink ethylene glycol or antifreeze, unless you have Austrian wine, wasn't it, years ago when they put it in. But we can see here from the different enzymes, the main one is pyridoxal 5-phosphate, the transferase enzyme here, which basically converts oxalate back into glycine here. So glycolate oxidase, that's the same thing there. Oxalates, again, a whole range of different foods there. The one I think everybody always remembers is rhubarb and spinach, isn't it? So again, somebody with oxalates, high oxalates, oxalic acid, or oxalates like calcium oxalate, always check all the foods, see which ones they're having, remove them for a period of bit. Cabbage again comes up with a lot of people we find here. These are very high ones, take them off those. Oxalates is everything to do with your tubes. So this is the thing that causes kidney stones in a lot of people. It causes interstitial cystitis. When people get irritable bladders, a lot of pain in the bladder, and they don't have an infection, but it's just like a cystitis. Continue. This is 9 times out of 10 is high oxalates. Detoxified by sulfur, usually sulfur transferase. Caffeine, well, that doesn't really need too much, obviously, explanation. Coffee, even decaf, has a little bit, very small amount of caffeine in it, teas, etc. So we're all familiar with anything with caffeine in it. Caffeine causes hypertension. Detoxified by methylation, which we talked about earlier. Betaine, this was the part of the recycling of homocysteine here to methionine, and that giving the methyl donor there is the part that's zinc dependent, as I said. So if we don't have enough zinc, we may get a build-up of betaine, which makes us have a higher level of choline. And as we met last time, trimethylamine oxidase gives you that rotting fish smell. So people who've got that genetic defect could have problems with the betaine pathway here. Not enough zinc. So things that are naturally high in betaine, all these foods here. But the answer usually is not so much cutting the betaine, it's increasing the zinc. Cysteine is the amino acid which should normally go on cysteine to make taurine. And if we've got a polymorphism here with the cysteine dioxygenase enzyme, we may have a build-up of cysteine. So you notice here hypertaurine goes down to taurine, and we've got cysteine sulfonate goes down to hypertaurine, and this is a decarboxylation or pyridoxal 5-phosphate enzyme. So this is when people get low taurine, they can't detoxify chlorates from swimming pool, chlorine and things. They need the taurine, and these people need P5P, pyridoxal 5-phosphate. Cysteine foods is anything which is sulfury. Sulfites we've already dealt with, so we won't do those again. Just remember that sulfites are not things just in beers and wines, but there's a whole load of dried fruits and various other compounds which contain sulfites as a preserver. So you can't go wrong if you end up with your right natural food that you make yourself. Everything is in a process, everything in the packet is processed. So we just finish off on the fourth big of the fours, which is atropine. So atropine we used to think was a tomato or a potato toxin. Very similar, of course, to alpha-solanine, but one fundamental difference, and that's that atropine stops the production of acetylcholine, solanine stops the metabolism or the breaking of it down. So therefore, atropine is an inhibitor of the parasympathetic nervous supply, nervous system. So it corresponds to the gallbladder meridian, low acetylcholine. So if the potato weakens a person and they cross-check to the liver, this means that they've got a problem with solanines, breaking it down. And if it cross-checks to the gallbladder, it means it contains atropine, which is actually inhibiting the production of acetylcholine. So we get these confused sometimes because a person weakens to potato or tomato. Do we know whether it's actually atropine or the solanine? And we jump to the conclusion it's usually a solanine, but it could be the atropine. This is the value of cross-checking it to the meridian system. So if this person has atropine, they won't produce the acetylcholine. So they tend to get all the problems associated with the parasympathetic nervous system inhibition. And it's interesting because they're in the same foods, except there's a few herbs here that contain atropine. So atropine is called from the deadly nightshade, as we know, but it's not the same as solanine. Atropine counters the rest and digest activity of the glands regulated by the parasympathetic. It's competitive reversible antagonist to the muscarinic receptors as opposed to the nicotinic. So you get dilated belladonna eyes, beautiful lady belladonna. I should be looking at the camera. Okay. So you get wide dilated pupils there. Associated with the gallbladder meridian, common diseases, it's detoxified by methylation. Inhibitors galanthamine, lemon balm, rosemary, etc. there. High atropine, colloquially called hot as a hare, blind as a bat, dry as a bone, red as a beetroot, and mad as a hatter. So these are people who've got low parasympathetic activity. Now, these associations reflect the specific changes of warm, dry skin from decreased sweating, blurry vision, decreased sweating, lacrimation, vasodilation, central nervous system effects on the muscarinic receptors.